All right, everybody. Any questions about homework for tonight? No, we're doing good. All right. MNIST. All right, so metonymy was the next topic we were going to look at. In natural language processing, sometimes it's, if you want to actually understand what something means, that's called natural language understanding, NLU. And your Alexa does it, your Siri does it, Google Home, maybe a few other things do it. And this is a really hard task for it in general. Maybe you can script some examples for it to do it, but it's really hard for it to understand what is meant behind the scenes here. We all know as humans, but how is a computer supposed to assume things behind the scenes, assume what you mean? And there's a researcher named Walid Saba who talks about strategies for this. How do humans solve this problem? I want to see what you guys think. How do humans solve this problem? When you're at a restaurant and you're a waiter and someone tells you, table 5 wants dessert, you know what they mean. How do you know? Context. That's one word. Nice. Can you elaborate?
Like just understanding, because you understand you're at a restaurant, you understand people are going to the restaurant. And then if you don't, if they say table 5 wants dessert, and you go to the 5, there are people at table 5. The people probably want dessert in that situation. Now the issue would be no one's at table 5, and table 5 wants dessert. Then that doesn't make sense.
And also, like, if you just have like table 5 wants dessert, like a table can't want anything. So I guess it's logical explanation. There's something at table 5 that wants dessert.
How do you program that though? How do you write that in a more general way that doesn't require tables or people?
Could classify certain words as like things that only can be done by certain actors.
Yeah. That is exactly what Walid Saba basically researched. That you have actors that can perform functions, and a table cannot perform this function. But you have to ahead of time know in your giant set of nouns all the functions that those nouns could do. Is there a way to learn that at scale automatically? Because you don't want to have to write all those rules yourself, right? It might take a million years. If you just read the internet, would that do it? Or would the internet also have examples of tables wanting things? It's not easy, is it? There's no perfect solution yet. Okay, another thing people like to learn automatically from text data is relationships between things. Like, think about this. A giraffe is ruminant. A vertebrate is an animal. An ungulate is a mammal. A ruminant is an ungulate. And a mammal is a vertebrate. Putting all those in different order, we can logically assume that a giraffe is a ruminant, is an ungulate, is a mammal, is a vertebrate, is an animal. So if you find an example in text somewhere where it says, oh, giraffe is ruminant, you can just plot that away in your knowledge graph. A lot of people have built knowledge graphs that have just read from the internet or from Wikipedia. And then you can use that later on to derive other things. This is one strategy people have taken. Open relations are another strategy where You just have a subject, a predicate, an object, and whatever's in the middle, you just say, okay, that is something that this kind of subject can do to this object. And you just look for millions of examples. You can see here, okay, a person can be a spokesman for a company. Okay, that's something that a person can do. That is a role that that kind of actor can play. A company can be a unit of another company. A company can have routes. That is something a company can have. Or a person can own something. A person can be the proprietor of something. And then you may look for times when those are the same. Like those two sentences at the bottom, those actually mean the same thing. And semantic matching is another very difficult task. That's very important. Okay, now let's talk about what your Alexa is actually doing. When you ask it to play a song or to buy a product for you, order it, send it to your home, behind the scenes, Alexa has tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of these templates. And a lot of the templates may have been generated automatically, but every one of them is a rigid template. And it's going to have fields to be filled. And when you're playing something, if you're playing a song, it's going to want to know one or all of, title, artist, album, maybe genre. It doesn't have to know them all. If it doesn't know them all, if it knows just one of them, it can probably guess and create a playlist for you. A lot of them do this automatically, but behind the scenes, it is a rigid structure. There are specific fields it's looking for, and it wants to fill those. When you buy a product, same thing. Name of the product, vendor, how many. So even though it feels expansive, like I can say many different sentences and it might understand me, it's behind the scenes, hundreds of thousands of these rigid structures. It would be nice in the future if we could do something a little more free flowing. Okay, this guy had an idea years ago that he said, I'm gonna write down every little piece of knowledge that I have. Like wood floats on water, clouds are in the sky, rain comes from clouds. The sun goes around, the earth goes around the sun, just like every little piece of knowledge, try to write it down. And him and a whole bunch of other people wrote it down, and the structures looked like this. So if an object is an instance of a collection of subset, and subset is a collection of superset, then object is an instance of a collection of superset, and they would apply all these things like, a tree, the plant, and the capital city of France is Paris, and they spent years, and they got so many people involved. I heard they spent like 100,000 man years or more on this, and eventually they think they were able to duplicate the knowledge of a 3-year-old. It wasn't a great success. It was more like Sisyphus pushing a rock up a hill. Okay, another interesting attempt to gather all knowledge is GDAL, started by this guy. And GDAL you can use right now on Google BigQuery. I don't think it's free, but maybe you can do a little bit of querying for free. But GDAL, it monitors news media all over the world. Every single little news wire, news broadcast, anything everywhere in every language. And it puts them into a certain structure called Cameo, C-A-M-E-O. It's just like a taxonomy of events. There's certain events types like, war, tsunami, economic situation or whatever, certain event types and certain actors. Like an actor would be maybe the government of Pakistan or the government of such and such, or the department of whatever, or organized crime. And not everything has actors, but many of these cameo event types have actors. So then what you have is there's a new data dump every 30 seconds of whatever happened in the world in the last 30 seconds in any language.
Does it filter through things like fake news or bias?
No, fake news will be in there. It's up to you to filter that out. Now, it typically doesn't read from 4chan or 8chan. It only reads from news outlets, but fake news, well, the Russians began this program, Disinformatia, in the 70s. They were actually quite sophisticated by the 80s. Most KGB agents supposedly were spending 25% of their time writing fake news articles to be inserted in English language outputs around the world, such as, the India Times or Australian Times or whatever. Usually not directly in the US. They wanted the US to pick up on a story started somewhere else. And we know this now because 3 high-level KGB agents defected in the 80s, and their post interviews are now on YouTube. It's all declassified now. So fake news does get inserted into real outlets. And this kind of makes me think of the first talk we had today. How do we know when we're getting messed with by fake video, fake news? As I mentioned before, you guys are going to face this more than any other generation before, but it's not the first time we face it as humans. The invention of the newspaper was a big turning point. Can you guess what fake news was like when the newspaper was invented? Does anyone have any stories they've heard? I haven't mentioned this, have I? No. So when the newspaper was invented, it's expensive to have a staff of reporters, especially reporters that travel and go to places and report on what they see there. It's way cheaper if you just make stuff up. And nobody realized that. And the first guy to realize that, he did great. He cleaned up because he printed what people wanted to read. It didn't matter that it didn't happen, but he printed what they wanted to read. And the stories got more and more intense. And there's this whole series of stories in the paper, which people still talk about now, that scientists supposedly were watching the moon with the best telescopes ever. We had new telescopes, and we could see that there were people on the moon that were half human, half bat. And they were building ships, and this one particular half human, half bat boy was going to get on the ship and come to Earth. And there's like a whole series of stories. And I don't know how many people actually believed it, but people bought those newspapers like crazy. Now, that was probably 1910, 1915, around that time or so. Once you fast forward to when I was born, the checkout line, and I see stories about the Bat Boy. He was still around. Bat Boy is still around. Also, Elvis was still alive. Like, yes, my microphone is cutting out. Oh. No, there's nothing to check. We just keep going. So Bat Boy was still around. Apparently Elvis was, someone saw him getting gas somewhere in his pickup truck. All kinds of crazy stories. But I knew, as I remember, like I was just 6 or 7 years old, and I knew 100% immediately it was fake. It didn't trick me for a single moment. As a kid, a little kid. Something in between when it first came out, and it tricked many, many adults, that by the time I was born, I knew it was fake. And I think it's going to be the same for your kids. When your kids see fake video and fake everything, they will know they will learn it from the culture. Somehow it'll be in the zeitgeist. We will all learn as we go through this process. So once we get to the point where we learn which sources are good and which sources are not, How do you guys think good sources are going to show us that they are good sources? Trustable sources. How is trust going to be earned again? It's your generation that's going to do it.
The main issue is trust is very difficult concept. And like, currently, trust is like the media sources you trust now are the most likely ones you're going to trust in the future unless someone found out that they were lying. So at this point, there are few media sources that people will actively trust, and it's very difficult to trust to gain the trust of someone as a media source currently due to fake news and all this other stuff that's going around. So the only realistic way that I can see media sources building trust is only reporting true news for like the next 20 years or something. And that's going to be difficult too.
What if they do that and then all of a sudden you log on one day and it's not really that channel? It looks like that channel, but someone who wants to insert fake news has hijacked that channel. How do you know you're getting the right channel? There's always going to be some other way, right?
There's gotta be things that they can't replicate with deepfake videos, like certain facial expressions of body movements, or like the real videos.
So a lot of people have ideas. No one quite knows how it's going to be solved, but I'm sure it's going to be solved. And I'm sure that, you know, in one generation, kids will find it easier than adults find it now. Okay, here's more GDELT stuff. GDELT is really fantastic. You guys should play with it. You can create diagrams. A query like this is just a query about recent news about refugees, and you can plot it on a planet on the Earth. It's really a fantastic data set. Okay, let's talk about understanding a sentence and how it's been done before. So I shot an elephant in my pajamas. This is Groucho Marx book. What does that mean? What image do you have in your head? What do you think? What image do you have in your head?
I'm going back and forth between shooting an elephant while I'm wearing pajamas and shooting an elephant that's wearing my pajamas.
You get the joke there. Yes. That was the whole purpose of the joke. So how would a computer understand this? Because computers don't really know that elephants don't wear clothes very often, right? Anyway, a computer, typically, when you see a sequence model, think about that as an RNN or an LSTM. We looked at that before, where it churns through one word at a time, maybe both directions, but one word at a time. Now, let's say that we trained an LSTM with tons and tons of text. And then we ask the computer in some other way, we ask it who's wearing the pajamas. The speaker of the sentence or the elephant? Well, if it's equal probability either way, then the computer is very likely going to say the elephant. Because think about how the computer has to get to the answer. The computer has to either read this way or this way. And when it's right here, it gets the vector for pajamas. And then it processes one step of the LSTM or whatever recurrent neural network you're doing. Remember those boxes with the A in the middle? So it goes to here. And then that one step changes its internal memory a little bit. Then it goes to here, it does it again. And at every step, you have the probability to forget some of what you know. So if you want to connect pajamas to either elephant or to I, every step makes it more difficult to connect the dots. Those are called long distance relationships or long distance interactions. So it's very hard to teach it if it knows, let's say that pajamas are worn by a noun, and some kind of noun, it gets to here, it's very hard to teach it to ignore this and keep going all the way until it gets to. That's very hard to do. You have to give it millions of examples, where lots of the examples, you have the thing that's not wearing the clothing at the other end of the sentence, then it has to skip something. Very hard. So one of the solutions they came up with for these long distance interactions was the transformer. Now we're going to get into it, but this is a super simplified idea of it. Every word pays attention to every other word. Therefore, in a sense, I is as close to pajamas as elephant is, right? Because they're all directly connected to each other. So the way they solve the problem of being too many steps away is to make everything one step away. In a sense, we'll get into the complexity soon, but that introduces a lot of noise, doesn't it? And the way you learn to ignore the noise is just more data. There's no data like more data. Remember that? So GPT-3, for instance, were trained on 1.1 million years of English, assuming 20,000 words per day, which is a typical human diet of English. Let's look at another way to address this. Dependency trees. This is like a parse of the sentence. There's two different kinds of parses out there. One is called constituency parsing, and that may be what you guys have seen before, what you're used to. It is more common, but I believe this is a better representation of need. Not a new idea. It comes out of the 1800s, a guy named Lucien Tenier, a French linguist. The idea is you have the main verb be the root of the tree. The tree branches down. The main verb is the reason for the existence of this sentence in the first place. That's part of Tenier's idea. That if there's no main verb, there's no sentence, there's no tree. This is not for noun phrases, this is for real sentence. So you put that verb right at the top. Then you put the arguments to the verb below it. An argument, think about argument as a function. If you have a function, it has arguments, right? Well, some verbs have more arguments than others. Marker. Say, Bob walks to school. Well, this is your main verb here, walks. And you're going to have Bob, and you're going to have school. The fact that it's to school is actually meaning-wise encased in the idea of walks. You actually walks to would be the real verb. And there are languages where, you know, like walking to or walking from might have totally different words. So walks to has two arguments. The one doing the walking and the place where they're walking. Can any of you name me a verb that might take just one argument? Sat. Like she sat. Yes. It feels like it needs the word down in it, but that could be part of the verb. She sat down. Yes. All right. So one argument. We got sat. Sleep is another example. I sleep. Or two. Did I hear another one? No? Okay, for two arguments. Walk. What?
Woke.
Woke?
Yeah, woke.
Oh, yeah, like right. Yeah, sleep and woke. Awoke. Yeah. Just WOKE is very commonly used now, but that's different. Okay, so stay woke. Walk. What else? What other two arguments verbs can you think of? Well, eat, Bob ate a burger, right? What's that? Did I hear?
I feel like you can do like most words with two arguments, right? Like read. I mean, I think you can always fit.
Read a book.
Yeah.
Jim reads a book. Yep. How about three arguments? Okay, when you put and in there, that's it can kind of do that, but that branching structure is a little different because you could put everyone in this class on that, this person and that person and this person, but if you don't use and, you could say Bob talked with Alex. That's still only two arguments. No, I don't think so. But it needs the phrase needs to play some kind of noun role, I think. Yeah. Now, here, if we're getting into the weeds here, what you'll find is that linguists don't all agree, and they have fights for their whole careers about what things mean. I think what they might say is that that is more a descriptor than an argument. But that's a very good thought. What's that?
Puts like I put the book on the shelf.
Maybe. That might work. Another example I think of is Bob gave a book to Alex. So the gift is one of the arguments, the giver is an argument, and the recipient is an argument.
But you can also be like, I gave blood.
Yeah, that only has two arguments. Yeah, so give can be either one.
This prepositional phrase translates to get right again. It's like a separate phrase.
Yeah. So this is one way to map it out onto a tree. It's not the only way. There is a lot of disagreement in exactly how you make these trees. You would think of pajamas as the main thing here. The fact that they're my pajamas is secondary. They're actually they're pajamas, and in is something that the pajamas are doing. Pajamas, that's like a kind of a function they play or something. So this is one way to handle prepositional phrases. Not the only way. If you try out the spacey dependency parser or the stanza or the diaparser, these are free dependency parsers you can find online. NLTK might have one. They all do it differently, every one of them. There's a little differences sometimes, big differences other times. So give could be under 2 or under the 3. Can you think of a for argument verb? If all the arguments are, the way you think about arguments is if you're doing a certain meaning of the verb, all arguments are required. So give, just I give blood, in a sense, behind the scenes, it's a different meaning than I give a book or a thing to a person. Even though you think of them very much the same, in your mind, give with 3 arguments is different than give with 2 arguments. Can you think of a verb or a meaning structure that requires 4 arguments? I can't either, and I've never met anyone who can. A friend of mine thinks that you can kind of do it if you say, I'm going to bet on the Patriots winning the Super Bowl. And maybe that's 4 arguments, but I don't buy it. Any questions on this? All right. Knowledge graphs, another way to understand the world. James Pustejovsky, I think, came up with these. So earlier on, when we looked at, a giraffe is an ungulate is a mammal and all that stuff, you can gather those from the world, right? Now you can build these type of graphs where an elephant is a type of animal, a bird is a type of animal, pajamas are a type of clothing, a sock is a type of clothing, a leg is a type of body part or a part of. So these are part of graphs. Leg and eye are part of body, wheel and axle part of car. There's also useful for graphs. So an airplane is useful for travel, car is useful for travel, hook is useful for fishing, a rod is useful for fishing. Comes from graphs. Plants comes from a seed, tree comes from a seed. Satisfaction comes from work and homework, hopefully. And wages come from work. They don't come from homework, that's for sure. What Pustejovsky was saying is that all of human knowledge and language can be reasonably mapped by just these 4 knowledge graphs. Type of, part of, useful for, and comes from. And you can ignore everything else. Do you guys think that's true? Are there any other knowledge graphs you think are essential for doing proper NLU? I can't think of any. Seems like a good idea. Okay, and let's go back to this sentence. If we're going to use Pustejovsky's knowledge graph to figure out which meaning was meant by Groucho Marx, one thing we can do is we can take this graph and we can use that type of hierarchy, remember? And now, instead of elephant, we replace it with animal. And instead of pajamas, we replace it with clothing. Reason this might be useful is because you could go a million years and not have anybody say anything about elephants wearing pajamas, right? But somewhere in a giant body of text, they are going to talk about animals in clothing, right? Even if it's just a person with a dog out on a walk and it's got a little coat on or socks on it or something. So if you go up one of those knowledge graphs, you get to things that are more common. It's a way to back off from the specific to something more general. And oftentimes machine learning will work better on the more general case because in a sense, you're making everything that could exist, more examples of it. You have a richer data set to learn from. So we can look at this and judge how often in a large corpus of text did animals wear clothing. And then we do that same thing with the human wearing the clothing, assuming the speaker is a human, which it may not be, but assuming it is. And we can weight each of the understandings with its prevalence in our training corpus. And then we could say, okay, one of these is more likely than the other. If there's two understandings and they both reach a certain level, maybe we can tell the computer to laugh. Okay, another really interesting use case is the Winograd schema. And I think Winograd was a place where they did this. But the idea was, let's come up with examples that will break our algorithms. The tuba didn't fit in the suitcase because it was too small. Let's just look at the top line for a second. One of the challenges in human language is pronouns. What does it refer to? So when they talk about this is anaphora and cataphora, or they just use the word anaphora. Anaphora just means pronouns and what they refer to. And anaphora and cataphora, they actually go different directions. One, reaches forward, one reaches back, but you can just refer to them all as anaphora if you want. Anaphora resolution is a very difficult problem in natural language understanding, and sometimes you have to do it right if you want to translate a sentence. So in a sentence in Spanish, maybe you can tell what relates to what because everything is gendered. But in English, we don't have gendered nouns. So you have to guess. And obviously, the it's in the top sentence refers to what? Yes. And in the bottom sentence, yes. So if you happen to have data that only has examples of the top one, and you learn using your machine learning, you're a computer, right? You learn using machine learning of the patterns of words, right? One of the patterns you will pick up is that almost everywhere that big can go, the word small can go to. Those two words are interchangeable depending on things you don't know about. If you live inside a microchip, right? If you're not out there in the real world touching things and trying to put things in boxes and whatever, it just knows that small and big can be put in generally the same places. And let's say it learns to connect it to the thing that's closest to it, suitcase. But then you come along and you give it that second sentence, it will get it wrong. It won't know it's getting it wrong. It just straight up get it wrong with high confidence. How do you solve this problem? Is it solvable? How many of you guys think this problem has been solved? Okay. Yeah, a few of you. How do you think they solved it?
So for the elephant and movement example, or the eye and elephant example with the pajamas, like it could create a relationship where like tuba and suitcase would be objects, and like tuba would be like fitting in a suitcase, like the bird with a suitcase can fit in a tuba, using that relationship to be able to.
That's a good thought, and that might work if you do just size, but there's always going to be other things that are going to come up. The way they've solved it for the most part, go ahead.
In this case, I feel like logically, if like think about the sentences, like if it didn't fit because it was too small, it can't be because the tuba was too small, because then it would easily fit inside of the suitcase. So it just like it's not too complex in these two sentences.
Yeah, it seems like you could solve this by addressing the concept of size and fitting. If you had some understanding of what it means for something to fit and size, then you could understand cases like this. But that's not how they solved this so far. What they've done so far is just have even bigger models, train on even more text, and it makes fewer mistakes overall. It doesn't understand anything, but it makes fewer mistakes in the outputs. We'll get into the models that do that, transformers, basically. So even if you did something that could understand size and fitting, think about the infiniteness of human language. The city councilman refused the demonstrators a permit because they feared violence. They refers to who? In the first one. Who? Okay. City councilman refused the demonstrators a permit because they advocated violence. Who does they refer to there? Speak up, I can't hear. Yes. How do we know that? Yeah, it has to do with your instincts about how humans act in difficult situations, right?
Well, because we use this data, I was interested. Because what's the other.
However, computer doesn't know how humans act. It doesn't know about our psychology. It doesn't know that it makes no sense to refuse a permit because of you want to do the violence. There are things in here that are very easy for a human to understand. And some of it is just our preconceptions about who does what in different situations, different roles people play. That's our preconceptions. Computers don't know that. So one way to handle this is you could write a model, a special module in your model, instead of to understand fit and size, maybe it understands, violence and permits and the way councilmen act, council people. It's what I'm trying to get across to you is that attacking every one of these edge cases on its own is kind of pointless because language is infinite and there will always be more edge cases. Now, the way we've addressed this so far is just exposure to more language, more parameters. And we're up to 2 trillion parameters almost in some of these models. And they cost, $100 million just to train. And that's the final model. What about the mistakes they made before that? This is not how humans learn. This is the best we can do right now, but it's not how humans learn. Can anyone explain to me what this sentence means? You guys know Lauryn Hill, right? Rapper, 90s. Wow. Time flies. Is there anyone who thinks they understand this sentence? Or is it a sentence?
Down, it's got a verb.
What verb?
Comes. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Comes the main verb of the sentence? When it comes down to something, it's usually like just a participle or a kind of a phrase to introduce the meat of the sentence, right? No pun intended. What's the main verb of this sentence? What's that? There is one. There is. Yeah.
It's just a bunch of prepositions for the most part.
Do you think, who here thinks this sentence references when you take the meat of a cow and grind it up? Is that in there anywhere? Is ground beef as a compound noun part of this sentence, or is something else going on? If you were to make a dependency graph of this sentence, which would indicate that you understand it, this is the head verb of the sentence. So who's doing this verb? Yes. And what does it mean, you think, to be?
Like,
What?
well, like modern slang.
Yep.
Beef is like fight.
Yeah. And it was in the 90s, we had that slang already. It's been around for a little while. And we used to say just have a beef usually, but the meaning got through here. What if you're, I watch the news a lot and I've actually been to Palestine. What is the beef usually about there? Israel. Specifically, what thing? Not a company, not a country, but what thing in the world? Be louder. Land. What's another word for land? Ground. So I think this rapper wrote this line specifically to trip you up. Because you see ground and beef right next to each other, you assume it's a compound noun. It's one token with a space that just happens to be in the middle. But really, it's two totally separate things. This is another challenge that natural language understanding is not good at. And if you go into poetry, it just gets worse, right? Okay, here's another couple funny ones. Spose is another rapper I like. Have any of you ever heard of Spose? No? Yeah, time flies. Take a read of this, it's funny. We're about out of time, so we'll end on this. Capital, of course, can mean, the first letter of a sentence is a capital letter, or it can mean cash. 4 lines together before a hashtag. Hashtag, there's 4 lines in there, right? But also, he's talking about the lines in a bar of a rap song. 4 lines. And a bar of a rap song, I mean, also he's like, I got bars on my tongue like I'm eating my phone, because if you have good reception, you have more bars. It's just those double entendres are very prevalent in art, literature, rap music, whatever. A very hard thing for NLU to get, but one of the more fun tasks in NLU. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.